Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing the 10.4 support tier list. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Check out the rest of the content as well. We stream most nights starting around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Usually go till about 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a very chill, friendly community. We'd love to have you. I try to talk as much as I can and explain what I'm doing in game, and then also field any questions or comments or just hold a conversation with the chat as much as possible while I'm playing as well. So come by, check it out, and look at the rest of the videos on the channel. Also, I'm going to do an ADC tier list. I might do some other roles as well. And then we have a catalog of coaching sessions, individual champion guides, topical guides like how to macro better, how to micro better, best one tricks, all sorts of stuff on the channel. So be sure to check all of that out. Okay. Let's go ahead and get in here. And I will say, you know, my videos are typically pretty in-depth. It offers, I think, a bit more insight, or at least attempts to offer more insight than some of the other channels out there. So it does go a bit long. You can always hit that little cog button under the settings and speed it up to 1.25 or even 1.5 speed, and you can probably hear most of what I'm saying. And I'll also have timestamps in the description to help you jump around. I will say that I am going to try to do this video quickly. I know that's a meme on the channel, but I do have to get out of here and go do some student conferences here in a little bit. So I may not have the timestamps up right when this releases. I may not even have a thumbnail because I might just have to say, like, upload and publish and then just, like, run out of the house. Because usually I have to wait, like, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how long the video is, before it's processed, and then I can tinker, you know, with the description and all that other stuff and put the thumbnail in, but I might just have to run today. So if it's not there when you look at it in the midday, I'll have it there by the evening as far as timestamps and stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. Now, I just wanted to really quickly hit on, I do have a separate patch notes video, but in case you didn't watch that, go watch that. I think it's great. There's a lot of changes on this patch, so that makes it kind of difficult to predict where the meta is going to go, but I'm going to do my best. But I just want to talk about specifically things that I think will impact support just really quickly for the first 5 minutes or so. I do think that people will be attempting more tanks. Now, I think it might be a little overblown with how some of these other commentators are talking about the tanks. The main thing is they changed the Bomby Cinder items to where they have this, like, explosive thing that's going to do a little bit of extra damage. So I think most notably this is going to help jungler tanks, which is going to be great for the support role. Because in general, I think that most supports thrive and have higher win rates when there is sort of the classic distribution of roles, where you have one or two tanks on a team, you have ADCs that actually matter, you have a mage, then you have a support that's a disruptor, shielder, that type of thing. And we haven't had that in a while, right? At least not in solo queue. But I think that's where there's the most diversity in the meta, and that's when I think supports really get to shine in longer fights where you have more contributions with your CC, with your shielding, your healing, and things like that. Like the Leona Nautilus like meta that we've had for the last year or so, like, that's cool and everything, but it starves out a lot of other potential supports just because there haven't been tanks, and ADCs really haven't mattered that much in solo queue compared to something like mid and jungle, and even top lane, I would argue at times. So, anyways, this is going to help out some of those junglers. So some junglers that I think that might start showing up a little bit more. You might see some Maokai. You might see people trying out Sejuani. Zach's already pretty good in the jungle. He would obviously love this. Ornn is definitely going to love this top lane now. Maybe this pulls him into the jungle a little bit too. We'll see, because he definitely gets Sunfire. Well, I don't know if he would actually be jungle or not now that I think about it, because he needs his Ornn items. I guess he could get other things, but in top lane, he always gets the Sunfire, typically, plus Abyssal Mask, just so he gets those Ornn upgrades. And it'd be weird in the jungle because he'd have to get Cinderhulk, which is not upgradable, I don't believe. So I don't know if Ornn will make it in the jungle, but I expect that people might be experimenting with Sejuani, Maokai, things like that. And then there are a couple of other junglers that are tank-ish, I would say. So like Garen and Darius, depending on how they build them. People might be trying that out too. So that bodes well for traditional enchanter supports. Some of them. And then Amumu got some direct buffs. People might play around with him too. Felio's got nerfed. Not going to matter that much as far as bot lane goes. Caitlyn, I'm not a believer in that change. I think she'll still hover around 50%. So you might see some push lanes that can be pretty good. Oh, almost forgot to put Sona in here as well. I did forget her last time. Someone pointed that out. She is definitely good enough to make the top 15. Probably put her... Let's put her right here. Just kind of on the spot. And then we'll just bump Sona down a little bit. Yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. Soraka is really an honorable mention. We'll talk about her here in a second, but or a dishonorable mention, I guess, for this patch. But anyway, so you might see some push poke lanes. I don't think that Lux is going to come back. I explained this a lot in the patch notes video, but the TLDR of that is the main reason that she was a support was because of her shield and her synergy with Aftershock. Aftershock has since been nerfed a lot for people that aren't primary tanks. It gives a lot less resistances early on in the game. You can trigger it more often. So for champs that can force fights a lot, like Leona and Nautilus, depending on how you play the lane, if you're really aggressive and you're making plays every 20 seconds on the cooldown of Aftershock, I still think it's a nerf, but it's at least like kind of positive in some situations. But with Lux, where you're not going to be actively triggering and making use of these resistances very often, right? You're just going to try to stay back and poke a lot of times as Lux, then you're not going to get any benefit out of that lower cooldown. It's just going to be less resistances for you. And then the shield, the big thing about the shield that they changed was it used to, when you threw it out, it gave you basically one shield. Let's just say it was 100. It was more than that, but let's just say it's a flat 100 for math. It was a 100 on the way out, and then on the way back, it gave you a double shield on top of that. Now, it was a refresh. I don't think it stacked with your initial one, but it would give you a double shield. So, like, when you were getting attacked or if you gave this to your teammates, it would be 100 on the way out and then 200 on the way back in. So, it'd be like a 300 shield. And like I said, it was even higher than that. It would get huge. Like, and it had a pretty big AP ratio, too. You'd get, like, 800 or 1,000 shields, you know, when you had 2 or 3 items. So that's what made Support Lux really good, was the fact that she was very difficult to dive for a ranged champion, because the Aftershock gave insane resistances, and that really big shield with the instant and then the refresh after that, and the fact that she had a snare and a slow, just made it very, very difficult for things like Nautilus, Leona, stuff like that to get on her and kill her. And that was before those champs got nerfed a lot, too. Leona got buffed a lot. Leona got several buffs last year, and so did Nautilus. So they became even more oppressive than when she was in the meta, which was around like last April, last May. She was one of the people that got me to Diamond. In May, I played a lot of Lux, and then there was like 1 or 2 patches where Karma was good, where I played Karma as well. But believe it or not, I do play things other than Rakan occasionally. When they're out of the meta, or when they're in the meta rather, but I don't think this is enough to bring her back, just because like the damage on her Q is not really the thing that's keeping her out of the meta. The thing that's keeping her out of the meta is that she's really squishy and people can engage on her and kill her, and they have to buff her shield if they want her to come back, I think, for that. But it is nice. This will help. She might gain a 0.5% or percent, but I don't think it's gonna bring her into the top echelons of support. Now, the Sona change is interesting to an extent. I think it's overall a nerf. Some people are trying to spin this as a buff for support Sona. It's definitely going to gut her from top lane. Sona and Soraka are going to be knocked out of top lane. That's not happening anymore. I honestly, in my games, at least in like Platinum, for the time being, I didn't really see them taking over that much. Soraka was more oppressive than Sona, but people were up in arms complaining about it. The Soraka was good in pro as a counterpick to Ornn. God forbid Ornn have a counterpick. So they had to knock her out of top. I like the way they did Sona more than Soraka, but anyways, the thing with Sona though is like if you're near an ally, then you do get refunded this, and some people are saying, oh well, it's cheaper in the cost. But the thing is, you have to be able to afford the initial cost, or you can't get the refund. So it's not a free like 5 off. You have to be able to pay the full cost and then get a rebate in the mail, basically. Right? So in these like all-in fights where it can get really scary if someone all-ins you level 2 or 3 as Sona and you don't have a huge mana pool, whereas before you might be able to cast one more Q and that could be the decider in the fight, maybe that triggers one more power chord, and you burst somebody out for 100 damage to finish them off. Now you're not going to have that, right? Because if you only have like 60 or 70 mana left at the end, before this change, you could have queued and killed them, and now you can't. Even though this technically would cost less, it would cost 45. If you don't have the 75 for the initial cast, then you're going to be screwed. And it sounds like, oh, that's a very niche scenario. It's not going to happen a lot. I'm telling you, it's going to happen a lot. And it's going to be annoying to people when, someone's about to die and you have like 90 mana here. And you could have cast that heal to save them or to save you, and you can't anymore because you're 5 or 10 mana short. Now, one interaction with this change that I haven't heard anyone else talk about that could be interesting is the Tear of the Goddess Sona build. Now, you know that I have been a vocal critic of that build for many years. But with this change, that might be more interesting. Because how tier works is it refunds 10% of the upfront cost that you pay. So now you're going to get refunded more on tier whenever you do this. Tier is going to be a lot more effective, especially at kind of the early to mid game. So for example, you know, this costs 75, you're going to get a 10% refund on that. You're going to get 7.5 back, and then it's going to refund the 30 mana on top of that. So then that's going to bring the cost down to, 38 or so, right? Because that's going to take it down to like 67 and then 30 back, be 37 or 38. Whereas before, if you had tier and you cast a level 1 Hymn of Hour, it would only be 45 back because you would get 10% refund off of the 50. So that's like an extra, 8 to 10 mana, depending on the spell and the rank of the spell and all that, every time that you cast something. And that does add up, because you cast a lot of spells as Sona, in addition to giving you a lot of flat mana as well to help you manage this. So, my big critique of tier is it doesn't give you any immediate stats, which kind of sucks, and she does scale extremely well with AP and plus healing and shielding and all of that. So you do want those things. You can do Archangels. Archangels is not that great, like when you first cast it, but if you have your tier fully charged, it can be pretty good to an extent. So we'll see. I mean, maybe this brings back like a tier Sona with, and then as you build up your tier for a little while, then maybe you get like Athene's Unholy Grail, and then after that you complete Archangels. I don't know. Like, the thing about tier that's really weird, though, is like a lot of the items with Sona really want you to get flat mana regen, and it wants you to get like plus healing and shielding, because like with Athene's you want more flat or more percentage mana regen so that you get extra AP off of Athene's. With Redemption you want more plus healing and shielding. You could go Ardent Censer as well. So there are some options. I don't think Sona's going to fall as much as Soraka. I think she'll be around like 51 or so percent. I think it's going to be a little bit worse. Where you're going to feel this the most is going to be on rotations with your E, because now it's 90 mana, and a lot of times you're not going to be near somebody to touch them. So if you're walking back to lane with your ally, then maybe like this doesn't matter that much. But if you're walking back to lane by yourself, eating that extra full 25 mana cost could be a big deal. Tier will help out a little bit with that, but it's still going to cost you more mana. Or if you want to rotate from bot lane to mid lane and your ADC doesn't follow you, that could be a big deal too. So I think with tier, it could make it a little bit more interesting as a potential, quote-unquote buff, although you'd have to make a tier build work. You could just do like an Archangel's Lichbane, burst out Sona build. And I have been seeing more of that, and it does work a little bit better if people are skirmishing all the time, if you aren't getting clean 5v5 team fights, if you have a skirmish comp. I could see some of the value in getting something like maybe even a Sheen early and then maybe Lichbane later. I still think those items are not nearly as cost efficient in terms of team fights as Athene's Ardent Censer and Redemption under ideal circumstances. But if everyone's just clowning around in the game, maybe those builds can work. Anyways, Soraka. God, this is already like 15 minutes. We got to speed it up. Soraka has pretty much got gutted here, but I wanted to explain this because I know people are going to be asking how do these changes affect the overall tier list. But Soraka has pretty much got gutted. I talked about this a lot in the patch notes, but basically it's 60 less healing on the Q with 0.3 less, which is if you have 100 ability power, which is kind of in the early to mid game when you get Frostfang plus Athene's plus your runes. It's pretty close to 100. That's 80 less healing on your Q. And one thing that people like LS, and I heard LS, I've disagreed with LS a lot recently, and I love him. I watch his stuff. I think it's great to have multiple perspectives. It gets me to think about things in different ways. But he was trying to spin this as a potential buff in a lot of instances, and I do not think so. In my patch notes, I predicted this was going to be like minimum 4%, minus 4% win rate. And I said it could even be upwards of 5 or 6. Now, this is very low data so far. It's only a couple of days on patch 10.4 here. But, yeah, she's at 46%. And I'm pretty sure she was like 52 as support. I didn't even look at top lane because, well, I guess we could look just for fun here. I don't even know if she's going to show up. Sona is not played in that. I guess you do have a decent amount of games there, as Sona is still being played in the top potentially. Which is weird because I would think Sona would have been nerfed out of top But yeah, she fell from like 57 or 58% down to 47, so she lost 10% in top. So once again, fairly small sample sizes compared to like if a patch has been out for several weeks. But I mean, it's still 3,000 games, right? Where she has 46%. So, anyways, I think it's a huge hit to her overall because you're not only losing the 60 on your self healing, but LS forgot to mention this heal transfers over to people that you heal. So when you heal somebody and you have this Q going on, then it heals them for the same amount, right? So if you hit somebody with a Q and you pass out this heal to 2 different people, then you're losing 80 extra healing on each one of those. It's like, yes, you're gaining 20 right here, which is all good. That's cool, but it doesn't make up for the 80 that you're losing off of hitting a Starfall Q, right? And the fact that it only lasts 2.5 seconds is a huge deal now too, because then that gives you less time to spread your W's out. Like in a team fight, the W gets down to a 2-second cooldown, and when you have like 30% CDR, it's going to get closer to like, between 1.5 and 2 seconds. So that means you could get off like 3, sometimes even 4 of these W's with 1 Q hit. So you hit with a Q, you immediately W, then you wait the 1.5 seconds, you W again, you wait another 1.5, you W again, and then you might have time to wait another 1.5 and W again. So you're getting 3 or 4 heals off with this Q. So that's going to be anywhere between 240 to 320 healing lost on this. And that doesn't include how much this scales with plus healing and shielding. If you have Revitalize, which you will, and you have 20 to 30% plus healing and shielding, which you will, later on, then that's even more. It's like 500 or 600 loss of healing. So it's just an astronomical nerf to her. So that was something that a lot of people were overlooking, at least LS and some of these other, like, whatever else. I think I looked at, like, the pro guides or something, patch review. Nobody's talking about that. But I played, over 100 games of Soraka in the preseason. I basically one-tricked her. Most of the preseason, I had a 60% on her. I can tell you that that's going to make a big difference. And this cost is also going to make a huge difference. Now, now you might be thinking, well, that's still really cheap. It was 40, now it's 60. But 60 is still cheap. But the thing is, it's not guaranteed to hit. This is pretty easy to dodge. So you're probably only going to hit like 1 out of 3 of these Starfalls at most ELO brackets, right? Versus something like Sona, which they can't dodge the Q. It automatically hits. Nami, your W automatically hits. It's point click. Janna, her W, point click. Lulu, point click. Soraka is really one of the only major enchanters that has to actually hit a skill shot outside of like Karma in the laning phase to get her harassment. So it might look like, oh, well, she can afford that. That's about on par with Sona. But you have to remember, Sona, like, her Q can't miss, right? And it does more damage, a lot more damage. The Q in general off of Soraka does not do a lot of damage. Now, it is nice that as you level up your W, that you're not going to be losing health anymore. Now, that's only when you're rejuvenated, too. Right? So that's only after you've hit a Q. That's not just, like, naked, you're getting poked by a Xerath or a Ziggs or something, or your allies getting poked and you have to heal them. Like, you don't get any benefit out of that. It's only in an active fight when you're going to be able to Q and then land your W. Because it's really hard to hit Qs in the mid-game where teams are just kind of staring each other down unless a fight's already going on. Because obviously, the Leona can engage on you, the Nautilus can engage on you. It's just not safe to walk up and try to land Qs unless a fight's breaking out. So in poke scenarios, this is not going to matter. Inside fights, it's nice, but I don't think it makes up for the fact that you're losing so much healing on your allies. It is helping you out when you're getting 100% cost reduced. It is going to be saving you, in the mid game, you might have 1,500 health. It is going to be saving you 150 health every time you do that. But once again, with the 80 here, with all the plus healing and shielding and things like that, you might have been healing for 150 anyways. And this does get around grievous wounds. So, there might be some scenarios where this is going to be net positive health for Soraka inside of team fights. But once again, it's hurting your ability to heal your allies by a huge amount, and this 20 doesn't make up for it. So I think that's a really big deal. It's also not guaranteed, just like I was talking about Starcall up here, it's not guaranteed you're going to hit Qs inside team fights, right? People can dodge it. It's likely you're going to be able to hit some Qs, but it's only up for 2.5 seconds, and people can dodge too. So, and the movement speed being changed. Now, this is something people may not talk about either, but this is a pretty big deal. Because, once again, this not only speeds you up, it speeds up your allies when you heal them. And it's a noticeable boost in speed. So this is going to really hurt with your team running people down, repositioning. Like, it's just doing all of these under-the-cover things that a lot of people that don't play Soraka a lot are not going to think about. But it is massive, massive nerfs for Soraka. This is like a freaking catastrophe for Soraka. It's a terrible nerf. They should have just nerfed her wave clear. And they're nerfing all of her base stats. Or changing them around. I think they're basically nerfs. But, I mean, those don't matter quite as much, I don't think. They are giving her, like, 25 opening mana to try to make up for the fact that every star call is going to cost 20 more. So, okay, you get a free star call adjustment on the house. But she's losing mana growth, 20 per. So it's like level 1, it's a buff, but after that, it's a nerf. I don't think the base stats matter that much, but it is another nerf. So anyway, Soraka's in the gutter on this patch. If you're like a god on her, I guess you can still play her, but I would be looking to play something else. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the changes proper here now that we've spent 20 minutes talking, like, sort of reiterating how this is going to affect the meta in the patch notes. I think that Rakan overall is still going to be the highest win rate if you're proficient on him. Now, part of that is bias because I do play Rakan a lot. I do think he's good. But part of it's also, like, not bias. I mean, if you look at, now this is, like, really high elo, of course, you know, pro games. But he does have a 55% win rate in pro, and that's going to be higher than most other supports. If you look at Thresh, it's 45. Leona's 36. Braum's 52, so Braum's kind of close. You know, Nautilus is 52, so... Yeah, the last couple of weeks, Rakan's trending down a little bit. He was like 60%, but he's still going to be one of the highest, like, most popular supports at top level play. Now, is solo queue as organized as pro? Is it the same thing? No, of course not. But it's just one data point among many that you could make for why Rakan is pretty good. And he has, like, a pretty good win rate here, too. I mean, you know, he's, like, top 5 mainstream supports here, right? So if we look at, like, what's a mainstream support? Like, maybe Blitz, Janna, Thresh, Nami, I guess Karma, and Rakan. So that's, like, number 6, right? So he is higher than Leona. He's higher than Nautilus in terms of just overall win rate. So statistically, you know, he's looking pretty decent. And this is the highest he's been in a while, right? I've been recommending Rakan since he was like 48, 47, 48%. But why Rakan? What's up with that? Well, the thing that I always say is that he's just so versatile, right? You can engage really well. His R plus W is one of the best engages in the game. The main reason for that is it speeds you up, so you can rotate, you can get to situations, and make sure that you can lock down the target that you want to get. And you also have additional CC after that. So there's a really high probability that you're going to get multiple pieces of CC on people. So you can R plus W hit one person, then you can tag 2 or 3 other people, and then you can E back out. And that brings me to kind of the next point, is he's one of the only champs that can go in and get out in the same rotation, right? If you're Leona and you go in, you're staying in. You're not getting out. So if, you know, a jungler jumps out of a bush randomly and you're trying to engage 2v2 bot lane, you're like, oh crap, and you just E back out to your ADC, and you have a much higher probability of escaping. Versus if you get baited into something as Leona, you're not getting out. You're probably dying most of the time. You fight to the death. And then the same thing with Nautilus. Now, Nautilus is a little bit safer in the fact that he can hook a tower if they come out of nowhere and get you if you haven't committed to going in yet. But nevertheless, Rakan is going to be the most mobile one. That also allows him to dodge enemy skill shots really well, too, because it's a free dash with a W, so it gives you some decent game against things like Blitzcrank, you know, and Nautilus and Leona, if you can dodge their stuff. Now, those champs are pretty decent into Rakan. But surprisingly, let me say this, because a lot of people think that Rakan and Nautilus and Leona are just like impossible for Rakan to beat. Now, I haven't had a great start to the season. Let's preface with that. But I do just want to show this one thing up here. And I'm not sure like the exact, I guess I could look at exact win rates, Sadie, on different things. But I just want to show you like my experience, because I was thinking that too until I looked at this site here, right? U.GG. But if you look here, like my win rate against Leona is 64%, Pyke 67, Thresh 57, and Nautilus 56, Blitzcrank 56, right? And a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, Rakan loses to those. He loses to hard engaged champs. It's like, well, not really. What I lose to most of the time was Soraka, Nami, Shaco, Sona. It was like the enchanters that I was losing to mostly, right? So that's kind of the opposite of what people think. And then even if we look on here, I'm not sure what I'm going to find here, but I'll just look and see like what some of the strongest counters are on this. But if you look here, I believe these are supposed to be the things. Okay, so weak against. In the support role. Now this is on 10.4. Bye, love you. Now this is a low data set, so there's going to be some pretty like crazy numbers like Xerath, 28% win rate against Xerath. Just because there's only 7 games played against Xerath here, so you got to look at kind of the data here. So it's a small sample size of data, but it's just notable to show that it's not like you have an impossible win rate against Nautilus and Leona, right? Like they're not even listed here. So you're probably, a lot of people could go close to 50-50, maybe even be slightly better or slightly favored against those champions. So he's just really flexible. The fact, like I said, he can go in, he can go out, he can tag multiple people with his ult. He has very flexible itemization, some of the best itemization in the game, because you can go kind of the enchanter route if you want to. If your ADC is popping off, you got a Vayne that's 3-0 in lane, you can get a Zeke's and then build that, or then build out into an Ardent Censer after that for the double on hit build. If you have a team fight comp, you can itemize into something like an Athene's Redemption build. If you just want to go for like bigger shields and bigger team fights with Redemption, you can play kind of an engage sort of skirmish type of meta with Shirelias. If you have a really fed Darius or Set or Vi or just something else that wants to get on people, you can go for that. If you need to be the primary engage, you need to be a tank, you can go for something like Zeke's into Knight's Vow. If they have, you know, all AD on the enemy team, you can go Frozen Heart. There are just so many different items you can go on him, and you can just adjust to so many different situations with his build. They have a lot of CC. You can even go Mikhail's. So you could even go, you know, something like either Rush Mikhail's or probably just Rush Mikhail's. If they have like Leona, Ashe, or something like that, you can go Mikhail's into Redemption. Now, you have to learn how to play around these things. So if you're going Mikhail's into Redemption, you're obviously going to be a lot squishier. So you have to be careful with how you're calibrating, like how you're using your ult and things like that. So you can't stay in there as long to try to tag more people or you're going to get blown up, versus if you had like a Frozen Heart build against like all AD. So it takes a lot of practice to kind of get used to that. But he did have one of the highest deltas a while now. So far on this patch, he doesn't. Delta means like how well do like really good players on that champ play versus like just average players. So champs like Thresh and Senna have really high deltas, which means once you play them a lot and you're really good, you have a much higher win rate than average. But Rakan's delta is okay right now. It's a 4. It was like a 12 or something a couple patches ago. But either way, he takes a while to learn, but he's very versatile. He's good in almost any matchup. Your ADC feeds, you can still win through mid lane or jungle. Your mid lane or jungler feeding, you can still like power up your ADC. You can accelerate the game by trying to roam a lot more. He has really good vision control too. That's another thing that people really underestimate, that he can go deep in the jungle and place a lot of wards that are just unsafe for other champs to place, because he can always just W out, shield out to allies, press his ult, and just run out. Like, there's so many ways he can get away from things as well. So that's why I have him as number 1. I think he's just extremely versatile. He's one of the best blind picks out there. He's difficult to play for a lot of people, but he's really good. And some of the worst matchups for him, at least in my experience, are the Sona and the Soraka early on, just because you can get outscaled if you don't force action early. Then even if you engage later on, like a Soraka that has 3 items, it's just going to be really hard to win the fight. A lot of times, like, you have the engage, but she's just going to outscale you. You do have a really good shield. Your shield has a 1.6 ratio, I think, with a 280 base. It's 140 plus 140 on it. So you do outscale other tanks a lot, but you don't outscale like Big Mama, right? You don't outscale Soraka. You don't outscale Sona, you know, once everybody has like 3 or 4 items. So those are 2 of his worst matchups, and they got a lot worse on this patch. They got nerfed hard, especially Soraka. So that's actually really good news for Rakan. Okay, and then next up, very similar. I think that Nami is going to move up a lot. Similar in the sense that some of, I think, her worst matchups were going to be the Soraka and the Sona, because they just outscaled Nami. Now, Nami does apply a lot of lane pressure early on, so she's great if you have other bully champions. You got a Draven on your team, you got a Misfortune, a Jhin, or something like that. She's going to be solid, and she's really good with Cassiopeia. You don't see Cassiopeia a lot. I get people on my team going, why'd you pick Cassiopeia? You know, I get people on the stream, too, sometimes that are like, Cassiopeia? Why the hell would you play Cassiopeia bottom? Well, she does have a 58% win rate right now. In the bot lane. She's one of the best kept secrets in solo queue. I think some of the tier list even recognize it, but they never say it. on like the audio part of their tier list. So I think that things like pro guides and things have Cassiopeia ranked pretty highly, but they just never talk about it. So, you know, check out my ADC tier list. I'll talk about Cassio a lot more, but I do think that she's good right now. And now that tanks are coming back into the meta, she's going to be even better. Because she's extremely good in tank metas. So, Nami does play really well with Cassio because they changed her E to where whenever you E somebody, then spells can trigger it as well. So, putting that on Cassio is massive. Also, you put the slow on him as well with that. If Cassio rushes Leandri's, you automatically are getting the slow off of your E so that Cassiopeia can run them down a lot. And Cassio loves slows. She loves movement speed and slows. So that's an extremely good combination in the bot lane is Nami Cassio. But aside from that, Nami just kind of fits in with a lot of other people as well. Like I said, she's aggressive early. Anyone else that has double shot mechanics like that, like Lucian classically is very good as well with Nami. I don't know if we're going to see Lucian as much because he's not as good against tanks, but he is good at bullying things that are good against tanks, like Vayne. So if everyone starts playing Vayne and Ezreal, we might see some more Lucian, but either way, Nami's set. She has a lot more CC, which is what she contributes than a lot of other champs out there. She's got the bubble, so she has real kill threat inside the lane without having to use an ult. She does have an ult as well, obviously, which is really good at sort of slowing people down. It does speed up all of your allies as well when people run through your ultimate. So being able to like cast your ult and then cast a Shurelya's or something across your team just gives a massive spike in movement speed and can potentially slow down the enemy. And her scaling's okay. You know, her W's all right in terms of the healing. She does kind of play a little bit better around Grievous Wounds than some of the other enchanters because she has other things going on. You know, she's got the bubble, she's got the ult, she's got the slow on her E. So it sucks if your healing gets reduced a little bit on your W, but overall it's not like that big of a deal. And she's not as good with the traditional plus healing and shielding items for that reason, but, you know, you can go things like a Shurelya that helps out early on. You don't have to go Mikhail's, you don't have to go Redemption if you don't want to. So she has several build options that are good. It's just the main thing is aggression and a lot of CC early on, and that's why I think Nami's going to stay near the top. I think she is kind of up near the top anyways right now. Yeah, she's like number 4 right here, I think. If we put kind of the weirdos here, that was their sort of tier list, but she's pretty high up there in terms of the A+. Now, Bard is one that I'm just putting up here out of respect, just because he's got a 57% win rate with a 7% pick rate. Now, once again, that is something that I'm not sure. It was still 54% last patch, so he was number 1 last patch too. So even with a much, much larger sample size, you know, of like 3,900 games, he's still a 7% pick rate, which, you know, was higher than Janna, you know, is higher than Sona. It's higher than a lot of other supports. So I'm going to have to try him out again just to see. I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. I did look at the overall like build, and it looks pretty standardized to me. So it must just be that other things are getting nerfed that are good against him overall. I know some people have been messing around with like a Dead Man's Plate rapid fire cannon build. I think that was just like an all caps flavor of the week build. Most people are not doing that. A lot of Rakans aren't. They're just doing the kind of the more standardized Athene's Unholy Grail into Redemption. Seems to be really popular. You do build up a lot of damage early on. This does allow you to build more AP. So I think that can potentially be pretty good on him. And he just roams really well also. So if you can go and pressure mid lane, he's just an odd duck, really. Like, you just have to be really good on him. You have to have a lot of mastery on him. His win rate does go down over time, as you can kind of see from the chart here. You know, he kind of stays pretty competitive at 20 to 25 minutes, but if it does go to those 30 to 35 minute games, which are becoming more and more common, it does go down. Although he still does have a 52% win rate at 35%. It's just not his, you know, 66. I don't even know how to get that data because you can't even surrender. I guess if it's literally at 15 minutes. But he can play well. He can be aggressive. I would just have to think about him because the different interactions with him are kind of bizarre. People are still going electrocute as well. Now it's saying this is the core build. This Dead Man's into rapid fire. I haven't tried it, but once again, that's not the highest pick rate, and that's not the highest win rate on him. I guess the highest win rate first item are just something weird like Zanya's. or Knight's Vow, because there's like one person that plays that. But the highest pick rate by far, 313 games of this sample size, it's like 50% picked more than second place, which is Twin Shadows, is going to be that Athene. So once again, not 100% there, but it must just be that he's responding to different things in the meta. He can initiate fights, which is really nice. So I guess if you want an AP option and you don't want to play Leona or Nautilus, he can initiate fights from really far away, so that is pretty good. He does set up for team fights really well, but there's a lot of ways you can screw Bard up. You know, that ultimate can completely lose you the game if you use it incorrectly, and it doesn't do any damage. So you really have to get a lot of value out of that stasis effect, but it's one of those flexible abilities in the whole game. So anyways, try Bard out if you want. He does offer some aggression in the early game. You just have to practice him a lot and get really used to him. He's just kind of a pretty bizarre pick most of the time, but he can be a nice one trick. He very rarely gets banned, and his pick rate is, you know, okay, but it's not like an insane amount. Okay, I think I actually did I have a losing win rate to Bard? I went 50-50 with him. Not a large sample size though on Rakan. Okay, now Nautilus is the next one that I'll mention, and Nautilus does technically have a lower win rate on this patch than Leona does. But I think that Nautilus is still going to be just a bit more flexible than Leona. I will say the stopwatch change is another thing in the patch notes that I didn't mention there. There are a couple other changes. So the stopwatch actually is going to hurt the engage supports, which is also partially why I'm bringing them down a little bit. If there are tanks that are coming out of the jungle now and out of the top lane a little bit more, then that makes Nautilus and Leona worse, because those tanks sort of mimic the function of Leona and Nautilus. They can usually do the engaging, so you don't have to have that from the support role. One of the main reasons that people play things like Nautilus and Leona is because people feel like you have to have that somewhere on your team, and if no one else is picking it, if everyone's picking like high damage, no CC junglers and top laners, you have to have something like that, or it makes your game very, very difficult to win. So the tank junglers and tank top laners, if those do come back, it's going to create some redundancy on the engage, which isn't bad. I mean, more CC is good, but it just means there's not as much impetus to like have to do that. But then also it's hard to, like, you don't want to engage on the Malachi, right? You don't want to engage on the Ornn, so it takes away some of your engaged targets as well. Those champions can just like block for the AD carries in team fights. So if you're trying to get on like the enemy ADC and you've got like an Ornn and a Malachi standing in front of you and you're playing Nautilus, it's going to be really hard. You know, you might be able to ult the back line, but it's hard to get past that that offensive line, right? That's like the 300-pound linebacker or whatever. I don't know football very well, but it's big dudes that are in front that are going to stop you from getting, onto the Aphelios. But anyways, they are nerfing perfect timing, so this is going to be a nerf to Nautilus and Leona because both of them have recently been getting this rune all the time, because you end up getting the stopwatch and it builds into Gargoyle Stoneplate, which has become sort of the de facto tank item that you get on Leona and Nautilus. So the fact that it's losing the 15% cooldown is actually a pretty big deal. LS didn't even know it had that on it, but it has that on it, and it's a big deal, right? That means that you're not going to be able to activate like that stone plate for like another 15 to 20 seconds. And that can be, that can be a really big deal. If a fight breaks out in that window and you don't have it, that's huge. That's basically losing 15% CDR on a very important item that you're going to have. And getting this at 14 minutes instead of 10 is bad. Like, people will still get this, but it's going to be really rough, especially if you want to dive early, or if you want to, just be able to function in team fights a lot more early on, then that's going to be rough. And if you want to buy this yourself, if you don't take the rune, then it's going to be 650 gold, which, doesn't sound like a huge deal, but once again, it starts to add up. Also, the one other thing I didn't mention was exhaust being extended to 3 seconds. This obviously is going to favor enchanters. I'm not sure if a lot of people are going to be building exhaust. I've explained this before. Exhaust is pretty bad in 2v2 spot lane because ignite goes through exhaust. It does full damage because ignite is true damage. Does not get reduced by exhaust. And ignite also cuts the healing on heal by half. So that's a really, really big contribution. So if they basically ignite... if they ignite your AD carry and they try to use heal, then the effective damage they're putting on them is a lot. It's like 300 or 400 effective damage that they're doing with the true damage and with the heal reduction. And if you just cast Exhaust on the other AD carry, it's like, are you going to prevent, in those 3 seconds, are you going to prevent them from dealing, 300 or 400 damage at like level 3? Probably not, right? But this is a lot better later on in the game, right? Against the really fed like Zed or other melee champions. There's a lot of them going around right now, like the Dianas, Cassidens, Echo, Fizz. There's a lot of melee stuff. Riven, that's doing a lot of damage. So this will be good later on, especially because it's too dangerous to go really far forward with Ignite. So, like, if a Riven, tries to flash and dive on your backline, Ignite's not going to do that much late game, right? But Exhaust will be really, really good in that situation. So, I think this is indirectly a buff to things like Lulu and Janna and stuff like that. And that's also going to be somewhat of a nerf to Nautilus and Leona because they're not going to be able to benefit from it because they're going to be taking Ignite. So, it's not a huge, direct nerf, but that's rough. Also, you're losing Tenacity as well, which is going to hurt Nautilus and Leona a little bit. It's just going to stack a little bit slower on the Tenacity rune, because typically I think a lot of people are going Presence of Mind, although some people are going that Perfect Timing as well, so maybe this won't affect them. But if you try to switch out of Perfect Timing and go over to Presence of Mind plus Legend Tenacity, then this is going to hurt you. So this is mostly going to hurt ADCs that are using this for the Bloodline and just skipping any lifesteals type of items and just doing all crit, which is what a lot of ADCs are doing. Then that's going to hurt you out, or that's going to hurt you in poke lanes, specifically in the bot lane. So that's going to benefit, your enchanters again that can harass early, your Namis, your Jannas, your Lulus, that type of stuff are going to love this because there's going to be less sustain in the bot lane. So overall, this is a slight check towards enchanters and away from some of the tanks. So those are just a couple of things I forgot to mention. Yeah, Nautilus is still going to be pretty good. He's going to have his ult. It can knock up people on the backline. I did mean to mention Perfect Timing here because that is a nerf to Nautilus as far as his own personal itemization, but he kind of breaks even on that because that's a buff to his ultimate, because if other people don't have stopwatches, they're not going to be able to stopwatch his ult, and that's one of the only ways you can get around his ult. So, I do think that that's going to be pretty handy overall for Nautilus, but the fact that other people might be playing tanks, enchanters, some enchanters are getting directly buffed, especially things, like the Janna, like the Lulu, and both of them have, pretty decent game against Nautilus and Leona, especially at 2 or 3 items. If you can just survive the laning phase, it's really hard to win through those champs later on in the game. So, anyways, Nautilus still good, but the meta is shifting away from him slightly, so I still think he deserves to be tier 1, but I would just start slowly shifting him down over time. Janna's the one that I want to move up into tier 1, and it's, it's debatable. She could have deserved to be in tier 1 for the last, few patches. She's been consistently one of the top 3, win rate-wise, but I have kept her down there just because she doesn't have a way to start fights or engage. Like I mentioned before, if we see tanks in the jungle or in the top lane, that problem's going to be solved. And she is extremely good in tank metas. She's going to be one of the best. Lulu and Janna are going to be, the 2 best in tank metas a lot of times. I'm not still fully convinced people are going to do the tank meta, though. They might. But in general, we all know in solo queue, people want the pentakills. People, want the huge stat lines. They want, the 10-2 games. And you're just not going to get that most of the time playing something like Maokai in the jungle. So people's egos might stop them from playing what would ultimately be the best comps. But if they see enough pros doing it and winning with it, they might play it a little bit more. We'll see. If the all caps videos keep talking about it, maybe people will do it. So I've tentatively got her at tier 1, but if everyone is still playing Talon in the jungle now or Zed in the jungle and they're trying this crap out for 2 weeks, that I personally am not a believer in that. We'll see. I could be wrong about that. The Talon in the jungle, I think that's probably the most overhyped thing on this patch. But Janna's going to be good. Why is that? Well, she's one of the best champs to buff AD carries because she gives them a flat amount of AD, usually about 40 to 50, depending on how much AP she has, and that AD can crit, and obviously with any kind of attack speed, it's going to be hitting a lot. So not only does she offer the protection of a shield, which by the way does not get reduced by grievous wounds, so not only does she offer the protection of a shield, but she also buffs the AD carry tremendously with that flat amount of AD. So if we're still seeing Aphelios, or if we start seeing champions like Jinx, Twitch, stuff like that start to come back out. Now that they might have a little bit more protection, a little bit better front line from the top and the mid lane, then you might see things like Janna coming back out. Also, her ultimate is really good for resetting hard engage team fights. So if they try to hard engage on your team and you ult, it's just so difficult to get through the Janna. Her tornado as well stops a lot of hard engage. So she's really, really good in long fights where ADCs matter. And you can even shield tanks. Shields obviously are even better with armor because armor does apply to the shields, as I've said a million times on this channel. If you have 1,000 HP, or if the person you're shielding has 1,000 HP and they have 100 armor, it's going to take, and you give them, or if you give them like a 100 shield, let's say, they have 100 armor, it's going to take 100 physical damage to cut through that shield. If they have 200 armor, it's going to take, sorry, let me just start over here. If they have 100 armor and you shield them for 100, it's going to take 200 damage to break that 100 shield because it's going to have the reduction from the armor. If they have 200 armor, it's going to take 300 damage to break the 100 shield. There we go. So what does that mean? The more resistances that people have in the game overall, the more tanks there are in the game, the better it is for someone like Janna. The same works for heals, but heals can be reduced by grievous wounds. So shields end up kind of being king or queen in this case, in a very heavy tank meta a lot of times. Okay, so anyways, I think that positions Janna pretty well. She can harass early with that W, which is going to be pretty nice for the point click. And once again, two of her biggest rivals, right, the Soraka and the Sona, have been nerfed a lot. So there's not going to be people to sit there and bang with her. Because, like, early on, she, she can get out-harassed by those champions historically, right? Because she doesn't have a heal. And she takes her, and her shield is on a really long cooldown. So if she takes harassment, a lot of harassment during the laning phase, then it can be very difficult to come back if you get too far behind, especially against someone who can match you in scaling like the Sona later on. So Janna's like a safer version. She buffs up her own AD carry more than Sona does, but Sona was much more aggressive in the laning phase, could provide a lot more poke, and had sort of a better wombo combo with a hard engaged team, right? But if you have more of a peel-oriented team, then, Janna's going to be a little bit better. So anyways, I think Janna can be pretty good right now, but we'll see. It just depends on if people actually play tanks or not. Okay, and we're running out of time here, so I got to end this up soon because I do have to go get ready and get to these conferences. But Blitzcrank, pretty self-explanatory what he does. He grabs squishy champions and deletes them. So if we do see a resurgence of things like Janna, maybe even like Bard, like Nami in the laning phase, Blitz is going to be pretty good, especially if people are playing less Leona and less Nautilus. It's not that he's like terrible against those champions in the laning phase, but later on he's pretty bad into those champs. Once they get enough resistances, once they get something like a Gargoyle Stoneplate, you do not want to pull the Nautilus or the Leona into your team because that's going to give him a really open opportunity to engage, use their ults, all of that stuff. So if we do see less Nautilus, less Leona, or if they start winning less overall, I still think people are going to pick a lot of Nautilus and Leona. I just think it's not going to win as much. It'll still be alright. It'll probably settle in at like 50%, something like that, I think. But if you see more squishies, Blitz is good. You start seeing more tanks, you see Maokai and Ornn everywhere, he's not going to be as good because you don't want to pull those champions in. So it just depends on how many targets you have, and so much of it is skill dependent, right? If you hit that hook, he can completely take over games by himself. If you miss the hook, you're basically worthless. So, it's just kind of up to you on how that works, right? If you do want to play Blitz, you might consider banning something like a Morgana with her Black Shield because that can ruin your day if you want to do that. And he's a lot more susceptible to things like Morgana just because that's his entire existence is that hook, basically. If, they Morgana shield your Leona E, well, you still have your Q, you can switch targets, you still have your ult, you can do other things, but Blitz really can't do anything with that Q. Now, specifically, he is very good against Janna because he does break that shield. So if he does pull somebody in and you try to shield him, he breaks the shield with his ult and still does a ton of damage. So Blitzcrank can be good. If you're really good on him, he can dominate. He does have a really high win rate right now. So Blitz could be a decent pick. He's just very one-dimensional for me, so that's why I have him down in tier 2. But if you're, a god on Blitzcrank, he can be really solid in a lot of matchups. Okay, Leona is another one. It's kind of in the Nautilus camp that I just mentioned. I think Leona gets hit a bit more because she kind of needed Stoneplate more than Nautilus did. Nautilus does have some other build options. But she just scaled so well with Stoneplate because the damage on her passive was not reduced. because it's other people dealing that damage. So the fact that you lose like 40% of your damage or whatever, I forgot what the number is, but the fact that you're losing a lot of damage does not affect a lot of Leona's damage in team fights because most of it is going to be her passive. And then the fact that her W increased her resistances. If you have your W ticking first, you trigger Aftershock, and then you trigger Gargoyle Stoneplate, or you're near everybody else. Like, all that extra 80 armor and 80 magic resist that you get in team fights also made your W stronger, also made your Aftershock stronger. All of those synergized with each other to just create this crazy, like, unstoppable CC machine in team fights. So it's not that you can't get Stoneplate, it's just that, once again, that has been nerfed in terms of the CDR on it, the cost of the stopwatch, and if you do the rune on the stopwatch, it's not going to activate until, you know, like 14 minutes. If it's a really bloody lane, you might still be able to get it at 10 minutes, but I think that it's definitely not a good thing for Leona. And the fact that some of her like favorite targets, like the Sona, like the Soraka, might be getting played less, and you might be running into things like Janna a little bit more, who is going to be a lot better against Leona than someone like Sona would be, I think does not bode well for her. So she's still holding up in the first couple of days. You know, she's still around 51%, but she had been, I think, in the last patch, like 52%, 52.5%. And so she's definitely trending down, I believe. I mean, I can just pull it up right here. We're kind of running out of time, like I said, but actually, it's about the same. She was close to 52, so she lost like half a percentage so far. But I expect that to continue to trend down a little bit on this patch, especially, once again, if people actually start playing the tanks. Okay. Senna. So Senna's really good in a poke lane, so if people are trying out things like Caitlyn or Aphelios with this Calibrum early on, you can see Senna do really well. Now, her win rate is not like that great as support. It's 50%. And the thing is, her itemization is just not as good. Like, she works as AD carry because she can kind of cheat the curve by getting Manamune and still be very relevant because her base damages and her base like effectiveness in lane are so high. She can actually take the hit on tier and still do things, unlike Ezreal in the laning phase, who just basically does nothing for the first 20 minutes of the game until he gets Manamune plus Sheen. She can actually still do stuff, right? So she can get that pickaxe, get that tier early, still have a lot of pressure off of just the raw damage that she does, off her auto attacks, off her Q. She's got kill threat with her W when chained with something like a Leona or a Nautilus or whatever. So that's what makes her good as ADC, is that she can actually power up and get some of those cheaper items. But it's the exact opposite as support, right? She doesn't get that gold generation, and her items are very expensive compared to a lot of other supports. So when you're getting 2400 Manamune as ADC instead of having to get like a 3400 Infinity Edge, that's good. That's tempo positive. That's going to allow you to, you know, push and start contesting things on the map like dragons, scuttles, and things like that a lot earlier than other people. But, you know, when you're having to buy things like, you know, Umbral or Ghostblade or things like that, and the enemy support is buying things like Shirelias and Redemption, then that's going to be net negative, right? Because your items are more expensive. So she just loses a lot of her tempo in the early game, but, you know, if you do get a lot of high-quality harassment off, if you do build up a bunch of stacks, that is a lot of value. That can help you later on in the game. Once you get Umbral, you do get a pretty good, like, close range, really good vision control, because it gives you another sweeper, which is nice. You can't go as deep and get deep wards offensively as you can with Rakan, but you can kind of defensively sweep wards a lot better, if that makes sense in terms of Umbral. So she's okay. I still think her itemization is questionable, but they have done some things to help her out. She does have just a lot of raw base power without any items in the laning phase, and a lot of poke. So once again, if you have a Caitlyn and a Aphelios at Jhin, just something that's going to be like pushing and applying a lot of pressure early, she can still be pretty good. But I think personally, a lot of times she does get outscaled later on by the enchanters, just because their items are cheaper, and they scale a lot better with plus healing and shielding than she does, I think. But anyway, she can be good. Lulu, I think, is going to be kind of sleeper. I tried her out. She is pretty good in some matchups. Her win rate's never going to be like that high because she's surprisingly kind of hard to play because some of her decisions are tricky, whether you should polymorph or whether you should buff up your ADC. But, you know, once again, if we do start seeing a resurgence in things like Jinx, in things like Vayne, in things like Twitch, stuff like that that really wants to auto-attack a lot, if you start seeing Gensu users like Varus might start coming out a little bit more, then she can be pretty good. She's not going to be as good with things like Jhin or with things like Sona because they don't auto attack a ton, so they're not getting a lot of value out of the attack speed that she gives off of her W. So it is kind of meta dependent. She's a very meta dependent support. She doesn't scale as well as some of the enchanters if you don't have that really fed AD carry. She does work really well with a lot of auto attackers from other lanes though. So if you see something like a Master Yi on your team, it could still be very good to pick up a Lulu because you can still get Ardent Sensor and you can be sure that Master Yi is going to make good use of the attack speed that you give him. So I think that Lulu can be really good. The shield buffs actually were pretty nice to her. But we'll just see. It's gonna be very meta dependent. But depending on the matchup, she can be good. Obviously gonna be very good with things like a Darius as well, who benefits a lot from that attack speed. So if we start seeing Garen, Darius, stuff like that coming out of the laning phase, or coming out of the jungle rather, and actually being strong, then we could see some more of that thing. She'd be awesome with Gnar as well if we start seeing people running that mini Gnar out of the jungle. He'll probably split push, so you may never interact with him if he goes for the attack speed, but she's pretty good. She's pretty good overall. And then Brand, if you're going to play an AP champ, I think he's really good if people still keep building all of these like heavy melee comps. He can be good. Zyra is still pretty good as well, but I kind of gave the edge to Brand recently just because he has more uptime in his fights, so in longer fights, he's going to be stronger because his cooldowns are lower, whereas Zyra really, really needs plants in those fights, and if you're not getting kills, if you're not getting resets, if you're trying to like chew through tanks, it can be a little bit harder as Zyra. But overall, they're basically interchangeable to an extent. Depending on which one you're better with, Brand's going to have lower cooldowns, Zyra's going to have better poke and vision control. It just depends on what you're looking for. And then Sona, I still think is viable. I talked about her earlier. If you go for the tier build, that could potentially offset some of those changes, although you're lost in tempo and not getting Athenes as quickly. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it for that, but maybe it is because you have such a good interaction now with tier. You're actually saving like a lot of mana effectively on tier with some of these things. You're saving like in some cases like 20 or 30% mana versus just the 10% versus what it used to be. So you could still see her. She does still scale very well. She'll still be very well later on in the game. She provides a lot of guaranteed harassment early on. So I think that she can be pretty solid. Thresh can still be good if we start rotating more into a tank meta. It is a bit harder as Thresh. He does have a lot of CC, but if you're just sitting there chain CC in the Maokai, you know, if he's just eating all that CC or the Ornn, you know, and they have an enchanter at their back healing them, it's going to be a lot harder. So if you're a god on Thresh, he can work. He is better in a squishy meta. He does have some disengage, which is nice. So if you need engage on your team, but you also want disengage against things like a Zac, like a Leona, or whatever, you can still pick your spots and play him. And he can be, you know, he can be very effective, but it's just going to be a lot harder if tanks start coming in. You're just going to get outscaled by the Janna, the Lulu, stuff like that, if you don't completely take over the game early on. So once again, just sort of depends, but Thresh is one of the most versatile champs in the game as well, similar to Rakan. Doesn't quite scale as well as Rakan because he doesn't have that repeatable shield. Like, he does have a shield off of his lantern, but it's not going to be as good as a Janna shield or a Rakan shield over time, I don't think. I'd have to go back and look at it. I know you can get it to a fairly low cooldown, and it does scale with your souls, but overall, I don't think most people would consider it to be on par with those other shields. And then, like, maybe you see Karma in a push poke lane. Karma is very good at helping tanks engage, so if you do see things like, you know, the Maokai, the Darius, all of that crew that I keep mentioning over and over again, you might see Karma come back in, but there are other ways to speed people up now, so that makes her a little bit less unique than she used to be, mostly because of Shurelya's kind of is her ult on an item. So yeah, I mean, having Shurelya's plus a Karma ult gives you like massive movement speed forward, but you don't really need that a lot of times. So Shurelya is enough to get the Maokai onto their front line and get the fight started. So the fact that Shurelya is becoming increasingly popular, people are realizing its power for its budget, especially only costing about 2,000 gold, 2050, then it has made Karma a little bit less useful. But if people are losing the sustain though, right? They're losing bloodline, so if they're being really greedy, going for that hard crit build, and they don't build any sort of sustain in the laning phase, and you pair her with another poke champion like a Caitlyn or a Senna ADC, you can blow people out and get 30 or 40 CS leads in the lane and start chipping away at towers. So she can be alright, I just think that especially something like a Sona support is going to be a little bit stronger because she's also going to provide a lot of that poke pressure early on, and I just feel like she's going to have more utility with the global, with the hard CC, with the root on her W, with her E. I just think she's going to bring a lot more to the table than Karma does, and if you want that kind of early hard pressure, enchanter-esque type of support, then I would probably just play Sona over Karma right now. Although Karma is going to scale a lot better with items later on in the game. So with the Athenes, with the Ardent Sensor, you're going to be able to put it on more people, and it's just going to have better effectiveness than it would on Karma. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's like if you want that type of someone who can pressure early and have pretty good teamfight presence and have that speed later on, maybe Karma's the trick. But if you want that, like, to double down on the hard pressure early and just more utility, you know, off of like 0 and 1 items, then maybe Sona would be a better choice. And then Soraka is just kind of down in the gutter that I mentioned before. She's been nerfed for all those reasons. So I would probably stay away from Soraka for now. I do think I have seen some pretty good Yumis over time. I'm not sure what my personal win rate is on her, but I know that I've felt that she is impactful. I do, you know, I win against her a decent chunk. But I do feel like she can be impactful in certain matchups, and especially that movement speed that she can hand out on something like a Malachi, on something, you know, like Darius, that whole crew. Maybe she can find a home, but she's just really, really risky, you know. If it's just a Clown Fiesta and people are dying all the time, you're going to die too if you're attached to him. So I don't know. I think in Pro, maybe we see a little bit more Yumi. I believe she was poking her head back out a little bit more in Pro. She's got 56% win rate, but only off of 9 games. So we'll see. I think in solo queue, she's still probably a no-no. Sorry, Jolty. If you're like a god on her, then, you know, maybe you can play her, but overall, I think it's going to be pretty tough. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much. As always, I really appreciate it. It ended up being about an hour anyways, but let me know what you think in the comments. Come by, check out the stream, and I'll see everybody next time.